Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate you taking this time. Like I said in our earlier conversation, I really wanted to, speak to you so we can kind of talk about the learnings from US as they try to collect, as US has tried to collect shortage data, and really try to see what critical information might be important for countries who are trying to do this for the first time.
Good.
So I don't know if you want to do a brief introduction.
Sure. Sure. So my name is Erin Fox. I am a pharmacist. I'm the Associate Chief Pharmacy Officer at University of Utah Health. And one of my teams currently does all of the content for the ASHP drug shortage page. I'm still involved, but I volunteered to lead that project and initiated it in 2001. So I've been working on drug shortages for almost 25 years.
Okay. Okay. So thanks a lot. So from your experience tracking drug shortages, why is it important to do so? Especially if you're trying to get medicines to hospital. Why do we need to track shortages?
Yeah, we approached it when we started to do this tracking. FDA had a shortage list already, but it had a very small list of medicines. And they weren't really the list of medicines that our hospital was having the most trouble with. They didn't always consider a dosage form like a premixed bag or a specific strength of a product or like a lyophilized version versus a liquid. We decided to kind of broaden that definition of what is a shortage when a hospital or a pharmacist has to change the way that we dispense or provide a product because we can't access and purchase the product that we need. There's a lot of potential for risk and errors in those substitutions that you have to make. So that's why we have a broader definition of a shortage than FDA does.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, so as we look at shortages again, like how does a reliable shortage data kind of give everyone involved, the ability to kind of respond to the change in medicine landscape? Like what is the shortage? How is it used in practicality?
I think it's helpful for people to know if something is not going to be available for a while so that they do have time to make another plan. If it's a short-term situation, you can often work through that pretty quickly, or sometimes just wait. But if something is going to be gone for 3, 6, 9 months, it's a safer option to make a different plan. And so the shortage information can help people really understand what is available so that they might be able to pick an alternative or what is not available, just so you can make that patient care plan for your patient.
Right. And also, have you seen, now that you guys have been kind of collecting this information over a period of time, what have you taken away from what kind of drugs you frequently see on shortages? Has that impacted like other parts of the pharmaceutical industry? I guess, yeah, you frowned a little bit, so gotta know
Not,
where
I
you're
mean,
going.
I wish. I think we've seen a lot of frequent flyers over the years, so a lot of the same drugs being short year after year. It's like, oh, that's on shortage again. Most of the drugs are very low profit drugs. They're injectable drugs. They're drugs that are mostly used inside a hospital, and they're never brand name drugs. They're always drugs that have been around for like 50, 60, 75 years. So it's these older everyday working drugs that we need for our hospitals, but they're short frequently. And so we haven't been able to, make influence or adjust either yet. I'm still working on it, but we haven't been able to influence the policy incentives as well as the economic incentives that are kind of creating the environment where these shortages can keep occurring.
I see. So far, you guys have a pretty good idea what the problem is and
Yeah,
why
yeah,
most likely it's a problem, but it's
yeah,
just a matter of how do you implement
yeah. How do
the
we fix it? Yeah, yeah. And there's a lot of misaligned incentives, and it's really challenging to fix those. And some of that would require Congress to do something, which is probably just not going to happen.
Not yet, not yet. It
Not
will.
yet. We'll
Not
keep
yet.
working at it.
Okay, so could you maybe like walk us through the process of collecting shortage data as you guys do it? Yeah, just take us from the start to the beginning. How does it filter up to these tables that we see online on ASHP shortage data?
Yeah, so we will get a report about a shortage. Usually it's a health system, usually it's a pharmacist. What we do is we investigate, we'll take that drug, we will look at all of the different suppliers of that product, not just the one NDC that they might have reported. Because what we find is usually if one NDC is affected, others are as well. So, for example, if we were looking at a shortage of morphine injection, we would look at all the different strengths and all of the different suppliers. We would contact each of those companies, ask them directly for all of their NDCs. Is it available? Is it not available? And then we would just take a look at the data in totality. And let's say that there are 20 different NDCs. And what if all of them are available except for one? We're not going to post that up on the ASHP website. We will just kind of watch. And what we'll probably do is check back in a few weeks to see if that one came back or if it's worsened and maybe a few others are short now as well.
Because people will start buying other.
Yeah. So the biggest limitation that we have in doing this work is we don't have um, IQVIA data, which is the market share data for these specific projects. Sorry, let me turn this off. Okay, sorry about that. Um, so we don't always know which company or which formulation or NDC has the market share, and so we're a little bit in the dark there. That is definitely a huge limitation of our work. So, but we still make that assessment, and then let's say that for that same example, we looked and half of the NDCs were either on allocation or not available. We would post up that information to the ASH website. All of that happens usually within 24 to 48 hours of the report to us getting the information posted.
Um, okay, so I think that kind of covers.
So I think the biggest difference between what we do versus what FDA does, FDA relies on the manufacturers to push data to them. So manufacturers are required to report to the FDA when they have a shortage. Nobody's required to report to us. So we're always kind of pulling at data versus getting a data push. Um, from time to time, the information is different between our two websites. Sometimes we have more current information than the FDA, but it usually catches up.
Mm.
But our list is almost always longer than the FDA's, just again because of that consideration of how products are used inside a hospital and taking into more consideration like a formulation like a premixed bag.
Right, right. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense because like the FDA can then separate it by specific manufacturers where you guys will publish it by like the kind of drug itself sometimes.
Yeah, and we'll list each manufacturer as well. But yeah, it's just organized a little bit differently.
Did you guys see maybe during COVID-19 how the shortage data um, you know, made things, did it help at all? Was it used? Did you see people kind of like more interested in shortage data during those periods of like, global supply chain upheaval? What did you see any impact during that time?
I don't have a good read on if people use the data more or less. I would say during COVID, though, what it did is it made a supply chain news story much more palatable, right? Because people were going to the grocery store or other stores and not being able to find necessities. And so it was just a more general interest in supply chains in general. And so even though we've been having these drug shortages for years and years, it was very hard to get the news media to report on them until COVID, and then it really escalated news interest just in that supply chain story. And so I think since COVID, we've definitely had many more people interested in supply chains and just a lot more activity around shortages. I can't say that it's better, but definitely more people are. The problem's not solved yet, but the good news is that we do have many more people interested in the problem. And if anything, we have a lot of people trying to work on solutions.
Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, hopefully some will stick.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because it is market based,
Yeah,
yeah, financial incentive is going to be a key part of it.
for sure.
Okay. So I think now that I think we have a little bit of a better understanding of what it is in the US, what do you think about countries who currently have no formal tracking system, shortage tracking system? Like, what is the simplest path for them to kind of begin? Is it on the policy side to kind of like regulate, like enforce this, like the FDA does, or what is really kind of the simplest?
I think if the government can push on the suppliers to provide the information, I think that's the best way to do it. What we've put together here is it's again it's very piecemeal. It relies on the manufacturers being willing to talk to us. We've developed relationships over the years, but I think countries like Canada, where the information is pushed to a public website. Um, I think the Netherlands also has somewhat of a system like that. I think especially if the government is paying for the medicines, they have room maybe in those contracts to require reporting. And so, I even though we made a separate website from the FDA, and the FDA I think has some limitations around not being able to provide clinical recommendations, that may not be the same in other countries. And so I think it's ideally you would require it for any drug coming into a country that they would also have to report on any supply challenges.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Um, so what do you, um, I guess, do you see a role of technology potentially helping in this? So, I don't know how currently the FDA gets the data from the manufacturers, if they have a portal or something of that nature, but do you see a role where technology could potentially make this a lot easier?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, so FDA does have a portal for submissions. I think Canada's almost has maybe a better portal. If you've ever looked at their shortage website,
Well, it's more comprehensive. I've seen
yeah,
that. It's like a
yeah.
lot.
There's a lot there. They actually count each NDC short though, so it looks like there's like 20,000 shortages in Canada, and that's clearly not true. But yeah, it's definitely more comprehensive, and I think when you have a system like that that kind of everything gets pushed there, it's just a little bit more fair. FDA is making all of these assessments about whether or not they want to post something online. I think the biggest risk in all of this, and actually something that I think about if I'm actually am I doing more harm in the world than good by providing this shortage information? Um, the second that something gets posted on either FDA or our website, people start hoarding the product. And at least in the US, there are not good systems to prevent that from happening. And so, there is technology. There are companies out there kind of scraping data off the internet, trying to say that they can predict shortages, serving up that data to hospitals that pay for it. But what those hospitals do is they immediately start to hoard. And so, I always, I don't know if, at the end of the day, by the time we find out about a shortage, other people know about it as well. But it is hard to know that um, I'm kind of helping. I'm making the problem worse in some situations by posting the information. Yeah,
Well, yeah,
yeah,
I think that that's certainly like I've learned a bit about that. Just and I think there are things like allocations, right? So if there was like a
yeah,
policy,
yeah,
once a drug is short, you have
yeah,
to buy allocations.
yeah,
That
yeah.
could be handled on the time.
It could. The
It could.
problem is drug companies aren't required to do that, and
Right.
wholesalers aren't required to do that. So, and then you see the gray market companies that, really jack up the prices and sell things at very elevated prices to hospitals that are pretty desperate. So it just creates that gray market.
Right.
But, you know,
Yeah, yeah. So maybe that's another
it's a
way.
consideration.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so I think in terms of what do you think would be simple ways for to verify the information or the quality of information. Does the FDA do that now in their portal? Do they go back and like kind of like reassess before they publish anything, or is there, you know how that happens? I know you guys have this kind of rigorous process where you have to like check each one and kind of
I
talk to
mean,
people about it.
that's a good question. I think, the FDA, again, the manufacturers push the data to them. And because it's a public website, the manufacturers are very invested that the information is correct. So
Right. Okay.
we will also get contacted sometimes by manufacturers who um, ask us for a correction or an update, right? Like we might have posted something last week. Things changed. We weren't planning on checking again until the following week, but they want to push us some information because they want this public information to be correct. So I think, it's there's a lot of the incentives are there for the manufacturers to make sure the information is correct.
Okay. Yeah, I think
So
that makes sense. All right. So then just a few more questions here. I guess I think you kind of answered this before. So when you have kind of this data out there and then you put analytics on top, whether or not it could help identify blind spots. But I think what you're saying is yes, it can, but it could also, contribute to this problem of hoarding, right?
yeah, and I think the other thing to do, ideally, if we could, we don't, again, that because in the US, all of the usage and sales data to determine which product is has the market share. That is it's a commodity that you can buy, and IQVIA really holds those data. Um, that's probably not the case in another country. So if you could marry the shortage data with the information about which product, does have the market share, that to me, that's the most helpful information and really could prevent blind spots. If we had that data, we might post fewer shortages, honestly. If we see that 90% of the market is taken care of by some products that are still available, even though maybe five or six other companies have a product short, we probably wouldn't post that. Just we think a little bit more carefully about it just because of that hoarding that immediately starts. But every hospital across the country, nobody knows which product has the market share. It's the secret data. And so because nobody has that transparency, that's what starts the hoarding. So I think ideally, if you could marry those data together, you would have a much more powerful shortage list. FDA tries to do that, but I feel like they're way too conservative in what they post.
I
So
see.
yeah.
I see. Okay. I guess now looking internationally, do you know of any like international groups or is there like work organizations that really are working on? I know there are different countries kind of handle it differently. Is there like a kind of already a global outlook on this? Like how do we, because I mean, these are the same manufacturers that are distributed everywhere in each
Exactly.
country. So I
Yeah.
wonder, is it currently like, is there start already an endeavor to kind of like, how do we figure this out? Like,
I mean, not hugely. I would say the EMA has done a lot of work, but a lot of that is country by country. France has enacted probably the most serious laws about notifications by the manufacturers. Um, uh, but yeah, it's very piecemeal.
okay. Okay. Still kind of like
Yeah,
individual country. I mean, the supply chain within it is very
yeah,
different, but
yeah,
it is the same
yeah.
global suppliers
Yeah,
that
it
are
is.
like,
I know. Actually, I was gonna go to the UK and talk with the NHS in May of 2020, and of course that got canceled, and all of the grants and everything got canceled. But the NHS was very interested in setting something up like what we do here, and I was gonna teach them and talk to them, but it all fell through. So I don't think that they've ever done anything with
yeah,
that.
I feel like I saw something, but it felt like a private company. that was kind of tracking it, and it was a little bit behind a paywall, so I couldn't get much information from them.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess as we wrap up here, what kind of gives you hope in terms of like people, if like I know you were saying it's like piecemeal different countries, but that countries will recognize the value of, potential value of having this data, how it could potentially, you know, maybe help them update their policies
yeah,
in terms of
yeah,
how different hospitals and different manufacturers operate in their country. Is there
yeah,
anything that you see that gives you hope, maybe in the US or
yeah.
maybe like other countries? Yeah.
Yeah, again, all of the interest in the topic really gives me hope. There's a big push, actually, in the Senate from Senator Gary Peters and other folks around trying to map our supply chain and identify which products are truly the most vulnerable and trying to shore up that supply chain. So, there are drug shortages, but then there's also thinking about we might have really critical products that are only made in one part of the world or with one source of raw material. We don't know what that list is, which sounds crazy in this day and age, but there's a lot of effort being devoted to that kind of work. So I'm very hopeful about that. Um, I think countries should, as they're, especially countries that where the government is the purchaser of the medications, I think they should advocate in those contracts for information around shortages, and they have a lot of leverage to do that. If they're the purchaser, we don't have that in the U.S. just because of the way our healthcare system is set up. But I think other countries have that advantage. Um, I have heard though of some countries actually have more severe shortages because of the tendering process that they use, where they just pick one product for their country instead of multiples. So when there is a shortage of one product, they're much more likely to have a shortage where you're completely out. Versus where you can just get some, which is where the situation we're usually at in the US. And so, again, when they're doing that tendering process, I think it would be very important for them to require shortage reporting. And I think, again, I think those countries have a lot of leverage and could really make a big difference for their citizens and their countries by doing that. And it can't be that hard, right? Like Canada set up a portal, like other folks have set up a portal. I think technology, to your point, could play a very big role there.
Right, right, right. Awesome. Okay. Well, I know we're getting close. We're pretty much out of time, but I definitely appreciate you
Sure,
kind of taking this call and having
of
this
course.
conversation.
Of
Uh,
course. And feel free to reach back out if you want to chat again. I'm happy to do it. Sorry
oh
our
yeah,
time got
definitely.
cut short. Okay. Of course. Okay. Really nice to meet you. Okay. Thank you.